To give every Iraqi citizen a stake in the country's economy, Iraq will pass legislation to share oil revenues among all Iraqis. George Bush, US President.
Welcome back. That's what we're talking about. The rush by the Iraqi government to push through the new oil law, despite threats of more sectarian violence and concerns over handing over control of its oil fields to foreign companies. Well, joining us to discuss these issues once again, Kamil Mahdi from the University of Exeter in the United Kingdom, and Robert Bryce, an oil and energy expert, talking to us from the United States, Austin in Texas. Mr. Bryce, first of all, if the Iraqi government had decided to go this, not alone, but certainly more independently, rather than bringing in the multinationals, how much more money do you think there would have been for the Iraqi people?
Well, how long is a piece of string? I can't answer that. I think that the line from George W. Bush earlier, I think, was really goes to the heart of the matter here. And ultimately, this is about mineral rights. Bush says, well, the mineral rights or the mineral wealth of Iraq should be given to the Iraqi people. I think this is really one of the long-term solutions in Iraq, is to provide some kind of royalty to the individual Iraqi people. You get more cash into the hands of the people that would then allow them to spend it, stimulate the economy, create businesses, and jumpstart an economy that desperately needs more cash and more entrepreneurial activity.
Whether that is actually going. Sorry to interrupt, but I have to ask you whether that is actually going to happen with a deal which at the moment allows certain companies to have certain contracts, and as soon as the new law comes in, all they have to do is match a tender from anybody else and they get the contract automatically. It's not a very fair system in the eyes of many, is it?
Well, it certainly appears that way from what's being reported, and I think Mr. Mahdi makes a good point in that the international oil companies seem to be the ones who have the most advantageous position. It may be better from the Iraqi standpoint to do deals with service companies rather than the international oil companies, and just hire the service companies on a piecemeal basis and as-needed basis. So, given what's been reported, it sure appears that Exxon, Shell, BP, and Total are being given a pretty good deal here.
Kamil Mahdi, let's come to you now. Whatever happened to Tony Blair's idea of a trust fund into which all the oil revenue would go? It would be administered by the United Nations and it would be equally and fairly divided. No sign of profit in that idea, and it's gone away.
Well, really, this is a colonialist idea in a humanitarian guise, as what Tony Blair tends to do anyway. The idea of a trust fund means that Iraq will be constrained into how it develops its economy and how it spends its oil revenues. Yes, of course, Iraq has had problems in this respect. So have 100 other countries and so on. The issue here is, do we have a political process that answers to the Iraqi people and has their interests at heart, and a political process that represents something better for the future than Iraq has had, or not? The question here is, I disagree that oil should be handed out as individual entitlements of cash to people. Oil should be the fund that will finance the development of the country, that will allow major construction of infrastructure that has been destroyed by war and sanctions over a long period of time.
And is that going to
generate
happen?
Activity.
Is it going to happen with the rules that they want to bring in?
Well, no, it is not. Well, first of all, this is not directly related to the oil law. It's related to the whole set of economic policies that are being forced on Iraq by the United States, by the occupying powers, the United States and Britain, by the IMF, and with pressure from others, World Bank and others. These policies that demand that the state withdraw from the economy, hand over the cash that comes from oil to big multinationals in one way or another. In one way to the oil companies themselves, and other ways to lots of other companies to come in, rather than to activate the economy through the intervention of the state, at least in the initial stages of development. That's absolutely essential in all countries, and especially in oil countries.
Kamil Mahdi, let me ask you this point about whether the United States could actually have managed without Middle East oil. Was it inevitable that it needed a stronger hold on what it considers to be vital resources, given that some people believe Iraq's got either the second or third largest reserves in the world?
Well, let's look at the present crisis. The present crisis is a result of the United States, the present oil market crisis. It's the result of the United States policies throughout the 1990s. Their sanctions against Iraq, their sanctions against Iran, their sanctions against Libya. Throughout those periods, the United States has prevented the development of the industries in these countries and has contributed very considerably, of course, in addition to the inability of the United States to curtail its own consumption of oil.
And it's been suggested that these multinationals now could have contracts that will run for generations, taking a great deal of money from the oil reserves in that country. How does that impact on any kind of military deal in Iraq? Do the two have to go hand in hand?
Well, of course, you're going to need security before any significant increases in oil output, I think, can occur in Iraq. And that's, of course, the first priority for any Western company or any international oil company coming in. So is it a quid pro quo? I can't answer that. I would like to just bring up one other point, though, and that is, how does OPEC figure into this? Remember, the U.S., by being the occupying force in Iraq, is a de facto member of OPEC. OPEC was the first international body to recognize the occupying government, or the U.S. government occupation in Iraq. So OPEC has been willing to recognize the Iraqis. Will OPEC, though, assume, though, that the Iraqis are able, with these contracts or with other contracts, to significantly raise their oil production capacity? Will OPEC allow that oil to come onto the market, or will they restrain production to keep prices high? I think those are kind of the interesting questions going forward with regard to OPEC vis-a-vis the U.S. and Iraq.
A quick thought from you, Mr. Bryce, then I'll put the same point to Khalid in Exeter. Will the Iraqis get rich out of the oil that they have, or will the corporations get rich?
Well, I mean, thus far, if you look at the history of the petrostates, enriching individual citizens has not been one of the hallmarks of oil development. So unless or until, I know we disagree, Mr. Mahdi doesn't believe we need to distribute oil royalties to the individual Iraqis. I think that is one of the essentials here. It would set a new precedent in the Middle East to actually allow mineral right ownership by individuals, and that has been one of the keys in the development of the American oil industry, and I think it's one that should be mimicked in the Mideast. When you look at what bin Laden says, a lot of what he argues about is in fact mineral rights.
Kamil Mahdi, what are your thoughts?
Well, first of all, distributing oil revenues simply fuels inflation. What we need is production capacity inside employment, jobs in the country. We don't want we don't need a consumer boom that simply fizzles out. Now, who will benefit from Iraq's oil? Well, the history has not been kind to Iraq on this, but it's not been even either. There have been several decades where Iraq has, in fact, undergone considerable development and levels of living increased tremendously between the 1950s and the 1970s. For 3 decades, Iraq had enjoyed fruits of development funded by oil.
Kamil Mahdi, thank you very much, talking to us from the University of Exeter in the United Kingdom. Robert Bryce from the United States in Austin, Texas. Thank you too for joining us on this edition of Inside Iraq. Well, for more information on the programme, and indeed if you want to send us your comments, go to aljazeera.net/English. That's our website. That's all we have time for this edition. Join us again next week when we take another look inside Iraq. Goodbye.